let's run down this list. Leonard Taylor is at Miami. This was a huge recruiting win for the Canes. Cannot overstate it. This is the kind of guy that had been escaping South Florida and going to Ohio State, Clemson, or Alabama, and Miami kept him home. This was the number 10 overall player. He's a defensive tackle. Now, I want to stress to you, this is probably not a guy, speaking of Alabama, since that's who Miami opens with, this is not a guy that you just absolutely are going to have to see on the field from Miami when they take the field in week 1. Miami's got good enough depth along the defensive line, specifically at Taylor's position, where they would love for him to be a part of this rotation, but it's not totally required for them to have a shot to win. But it could be one of those classic week 1 versus week 7 things. Maybe he's not a starter in week 1. Maybe he sees rotational action first few weeks, but then you fast forward to week 7, and there he is. Because you wait for the click. With guys like this, who you know have 3-and-out talent, you don't look down the road and say, oh, we'll redshirt him this year. We'll use his extra year. You're trying to get him on the field. As soon as you can trust him, you get him on the field, and you wait for that click. And you listen to coaches all the time, and they'll talk about how, about week 5 or week 6 in practice, he started to grasp it mentally, and he was already there physically. And so who knows? Maybe Leonard Taylor's there in week 1 at some point this year. He's not an early enrollee. It should be noted. So at some point this year, it may take a little bit longer, but I think you'll see him on the field. I want to go with 2 names at North Carolina. One of them is Keyshawn Silver. The other is Javari Ritzie. We've talked about both of these guys within the context of North Carolina already. They're both defensive ends. They both came in this last cycle, obviously, for Mack Brown and company. Silver was the number 30 overall player in the country. He was a 5-star. Ritzie was top 150. He was a 4-star. Jay Bateman's the defensive coordinator there, and he was not hesitant in spring ball to say, I'd be supremely disappointed if at least one of them is not starting for us, and I think both of them, candidly, will end up playing, if not starting, really good minutes for North Carolina this year. I remember Steve Wiltfong, when we were watching different spring stuff, he texted me one day and said, those 2 dudes look like they play for Alabama. That's the kind of true freshman Alabama brings in. And you look at him, and he's right. This is sort of like an Oklahoma Atlantic Coast type deal. Oklahoma was dreadful defensively, and they had to fix themselves through recruiting. And it's been a couple of years process now, but hey, now we see a result where Oklahoma, myself included, we believe they're good enough defensively to win a title. Well, North Carolina's having to do that same kind of overhaul. Mack Brown inherited a very thin defensive roster, literally and figuratively. You got to get depth and you got to get size. And these dudes have both of them. These aren't guys that you got to get in the weight room for a year and a half before you could realistically put them on the field and expect them to stand up. Tim Cross, who coaches that position, there was a really good number here. Chris Hummer put this in the piece that I drew this from. They played 10 interior and edge linemen last year, 180 snaps or more. They rotate. Out of necessity, but also out of choice. They rotate. And so I think both of these guys you're going to see on the field. These are difference makers now. These guys end up changing the course of games. How about Kalin King? He is the exact same way, but he's a corner, and he's at Penn State. He was number 234 overall. The Penn State staff was blown away. When he got there in spring, he was early enrollee. He went through the whole deal. He led the team in takeaways during the spring. Every time they had an open scrimmage or practice, he popped. James Franklin called him the most advanced true freshman that they've had since they've been there. And Franklin's been there for a little while now, and they've had some good players come through there. This is big, though, because if you look at the way, the sport and the game is shifting, you got to have high-level corner play, defensive back play, but corner play because of the kinds of guys. Think about the kinds of guys you're going to face with Ohio State. Well, you put guys like Kalin King out there. You'd like to clone him to face Ohio State, but you put guys like that out there, you put yourself in a really good position to challenge folks like Ohio State and teams like Ohio State. So Kalin King, man, it's a matchup. Oh, he's going to be really fun to watch because he's the kind of guy that comes in and gets the same kind of hype as Derek Stingley did as a true freshman at LSU. Stingley was higher rated, but man, it matters. What are you as a player? Who are you as a player? Kalin King is going to be a player from day 1, year 1 for Penn State. And Adani Mitchell is another name, a wide receiver for Georgia. Now, this is a guy who was off the recruiting radar for a lot of you. He was number 381 overall. But I've listened to Kirby Smart talk, and I've talked to another person close to their program. This was always a guy that they trusted their evaluation on, and they just had higher on their board than most other staffs did, and even we did at 24/7. And he had a really good spring But the week before their spring game is when it really started to click for him. And then he shined in the spring game. And this is with the backdrop of George Pickens being out. So everyone's watching the Georgia spring game. A lot of other receivers were out too. And all of a sudden you see, who is that? Where is he at? Adani Mitchell. I'm looking at my team roster here. I didn't expect to hear much from him this year. Well, change the expectation level is all I can tell you, because he's going to be a factor. He's one of several kids that went out to California recently with JT Daniels, get some work in. You want to collect as many of these guys as possible. Now, I'm not telling Georgia fans anything they don't already know, but I think sometimes if you already got a full, not loaded, let's just say full position group, you say, oh, what's one more? It could be everything, especially at wide receiver. What you're trying to do is accumulate and collect as many different skill sets as possible. And Mitchell brings a skill set that maybe you don't have, and it could be the difference in a one-possession game. It could be the one or two plays could be the difference, and he may have that skill set on that 3rd and 7 to make that specific kind of play happen. You can never have too many of them, never. And so he came on late in spring. He's in the I think he's going to be in the rotation this fall for him. So these are some true freshmen. We still got a long way to go on this list, by the way. But these are some more true freshmen that, if you want to own this sport, you're going to bet this sport, these are the kinds of names you cannot lean on the preview magazines to inform you about, because they don't hardly know anything about them. That's the big blind spot in preview culture. People don't know what to expect from freshmen, so they lean on the returning guys. Well, there are going to be a lot of true freshmen who are impact players this year.